Hello and welcome to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com, where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm Duncan Castles and I'm joined this week by a veritable French legend. Author, journalist, philosopher, musician and equally accomplished in all domains. A man who writes about our sport with lines as compelling as, if football wants to be a family, it's not obliged to take the Sopranos as its model. More of FIFA later, but welcome back to the Transfers podcast, Philippe Auclair.
Thank you very much, Duncan. You're too kind for me, and thank you very much for having me back on the podcast.
Thanks for joining us again, very much by popular demand. We've got plenty to get through in this pod. But I think we have to start with Manchester United and the extraordinary round of interviews that Jim Ratcliffe gave this week, marking his own scorecard, I think, as the controlling, but still very much minority owner of the club. And I thought we should check the quality of Ratcliffe's homework by examining some of those, some of the more striking of his statements, and there were a lot of them. So Ratcliffe's Ineos group currently hold just under 29% of the club's shares. They bought in 15 months ago for $1.3 billion. Since then, they put another $300 million of equity into the club, which Ratcliffe in these interviews said has all gone. They're in the process of cutting 450 jobs, which is 40% of the workforce, more or less, and taking out what Ratcliffe described as about £125 million of running costs. Now, he sought to justify this by stating that the alternative isn't very tenable, is it? Which is the club goes bust at Christmas. Now, the club's own guidance and revenues for the season is 650 million to 670 million. Ratcliffe bought it just over a year ago at a valuation of £5 billion. How does Manchester United go bust by Christmas, Philippe?
Well, they won't. They might run out of money, but they won't go bust. It's not the same thing. We know that they are in a bit of a pickle because of the amount of money that they have spent on players, not very wisely most of the time, it must be said. We know that there are rules and regulations to be respected. But the idea that Manchester United could go bust is totally absurd. I mean, if you think of clubs which can go bust, I can talk to you about Standard Liège because they've got like 69 million euros debt. They lose 21 million per year. They have a turnover which is only 80% of their wage bill. I could carry on like that. It's an example of a club that is really in danger of going bust. Manchester United doesn't tick any of these boxes. Despite the fact that in sporting terms it is, way behind the expectations of its fans and its management, it's a club that commercially is still a behemoth and still manages to, produce huge revenue from commercial in particular, which many other clubs would be jealous of. So that's not what he's trying to do here. He's trying to frame Manchester United's problems in a way that will make his less palatable decisions acceptable. I think that's what it is. That if you scare people into thinking, guys, if we don't do this, the club will go down, belly up and so forth, people might actually think twice before saying, come on, maybe there are other ways to go about it. But of course the club won't go bust. The club will lose money. The club has lost money. It's not the first club to lose money. In fact, most football clubs lose money. The problem it has is that they have their hands tied, as we know, on the transfer market because of their huge wage bill. More about this later, because some of the statements about the wage bill were quite unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And they have got all these the PSR rules to respect, and so forth. They must balance the books. Yes, that's absolutely right. But the money can be found. The money can be found. The money can be invested, the money can be borrowed, it's all legal. There is no problem doing that. And who wouldn't lend money to Manchester United, Duncan? I mean, I would, especially at the kind of rates that the Glazers have been using it for the past 20 years now almost.
And especially at the degree of increase in valuation of the club that the Glazers achieved over that period of time. That's where you get the ability to borrow money from the banks from.
Yeah, and I don't know if you agree with me, but I think this statement is, of all the statements, the one that actually made me go, what the hell? And I probably used another word for that. Of course, and at the same time, he's also saying that Manchester United can be the most profitable club in the world within 3 years.
Yes, totally self-contradictory.
Yeah, I mean, so you're thinking, well, what's true? I mean, are you so broke? You know, a big club as well, a club like clubs like Manchester United don't go broke. That's as simple as that. You know, if you look at the situation of Barcelona were in, before activating the famous levers, and actually where it is still in some ways, it was absolutely it. They were very close to going bust, but you always find a way. There is absolutely no danger of Manchester United going bust. What is in danger is the spending power of the club, and which is hugely problematic, because that also contradicts some of the other statements by Ratcliffe. Though I will say one thing, Duncan, and we should say it, to start with, we're probably not going to be very nice to Mr. Ratcliffe during this podcast, but at least one thing is fronted up. And I wish more owners had the balls to do that, if you excuse the expression. And he must at least be given credit for giving us the rope that he can be hanged with.
Agreed, and provided us in amongst that discussion where he was handing out the rope to be hung with a lot of detail and insight into how they're working at the club, how much money is being spent in certain areas of the club, and how they're thinking of fixing it. And I think, look, you've emphasised that the line about the club going bust by Christmas is just completely nonsensical. And you've also emphasised that what he wants to push the supporters towards is the idea that the cost cutting is essential to turning Manchester United around again. He said, if people want to see Manchester United winning trophies again, then we have to do all this stuff. It's difficult stuff, it's unpopular. It would be much nicer if we didn't have to do it, but if we don't do it, we'll just finish up where we've been for the last 12 years. It will be lean, it will be efficient, it will be an elite sports organisation, and it will be hopefully primed to take Manchester United back to where it should be, which is winning trophies. Now, I suspect Eric Ten Hag would point out that Manchester United won silverware in each of the last 2 seasons, and that Jim Ratcliffe was sat in a director's seat at Wembley for the last of those just 10 months ago. To what extent do you think Ratcliffe is correct in his analysis that these hyper-aggressive cuts, by his own account, £125 million taken out of costs in the first 15 months, are essential to, let's not say winning trophies again, continuing to win trophies, and perhaps he could have phrased it better and said winning the Premier League or winning the Champions League?
Well, it's a very strange thing to say that cost cutting is going to lead to sporting glory, because it goes in the face of absolutely every single number I can think of, every single figure. There is a direct correlation, for example, between the wage bill of a club and its sporting success. I mean, much cleverer people than me have studied that and have come to the conclusion that's what it is. I'm really struggling with that because I can understand cost cutting. Absolutely, any good company does that and tries to maximize the money or the potential of the money it has. It doesn't want just to let it slip down the drain. That's perfectly understandable. And that's one of the reasons, for example, why people used to be looking at Tottenham in the past, that was a long time ago, or are looking now at Brentford and Brighton, and where there is a very lean structure but a very complex structure as well. Thinking, well, you know what? It's possible perhaps to have football businesses run like normal businesses, whatever people say. Yeah, why the heck not? The thing is that I cannot see how this cost-cutting exercise, some of the numbers which have been given are quite crazy, because I don't know if you noticed, Duncan, when we talk about the number of jobs being cut from the workforce, which is nearly half, as you've said. I think they were employing 1,100 and they're thinking about 450 going.
Yes.
And if you divide the saving it's supposed to make the club and by the number of employees sacked, and when you know the kind of employees who've been sacked, you come up with a wage. And I thank, by the way, my friend Nick Harris from Sporting Intelligence about that, because I hadn't noticed that. He said that's about 155,000 pounds per year as an average salary of the people being sacked. And I'm thinking, what? People who work in the canteen, I had not played that. There must be some people who were on very, very, very big salaries indeed at Manchester United, which we've never heard of. And it doesn't make sense. Like so many other things, it doesn't make sense.
Well, maybe we've heard of one in Sir Alex Ferguson, who has been jettisoned from his ambassadorial contract, which is supposedly worth £2 million a year.
Yeah, but that's, if you call that, I mean, if that's getting rid of jobs and redundancies, because I think what most people are thinking about here is not necessarily Sir Alex Ferguson, or actually other ambassadors like Brian Robson, who sees his, apparently his salary has been cut in by I don't know how many percent. We're thinking about the people who make Manchester United as a club, people who will be working in the canteen, in the kit room, and who will be liaising with the players, or all these people who are part of the fabric of any football club, and who are very important to what makes Manchester United, and being taken away and not replaced. And I think what most supporters have a problem with is that it's not necessarily Sir Alex Ferguson losing his £2 million a year for his ambassadorial role. But again, it's the framing which is wrong. I mean, let's go back to what you were saying, actually, because that's actually a fascinating question. How can cost-cutting lead to sporting success? The only way I can find some logic in this argument is that the money you save enough money so that you free up resources to invest on the transfer market and in wages. I mean, is that the way you read it, Duncan? That's the only way I can read it.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair to Ratcliffe, that was what he was trying to express in a couple of these interviews, that you save on the operating costs, exceptional of the playing staff and the coaching staff, in order to put that money into the playing and coaching staff.
Yeah, I mean, which is the argument that is being used by every single football club I can think of to hike up their ticket prices for the fans, by the way. Yeah. It's a very easy one to sell, because if you tell the fans, well, you know, it's tough, but this is the price we have to pay for sporting glory. Okay, fine. But in fact, I don't think I think sporting glory is one thing. I don't doubt that there's a genuine ambition there. That would be crazy to say the opposite. But I think there's a business ambition, because in the same breath, he also says the most profitable club in the world. Well, you need to know what you want here, because either you save the money somewhere to reinvest it in players and wages.
Yes.
Okay. If you do that, and given the size of the rebuilding process that is necessary at Old Trafford, which is basically everything, almost, and you think, I still want to be profitable, you're thinking, well, how are you going to do that? How much are you going to have to save? If you look at what is the wage bill of a very successful club, the kind of club you want to be, Real Madrid, Barcelona, but especially Liverpool, Manchester City, Arsenal, you name it, you're going to have to carry on spending as much as you are now. And there is no way, my friend, absolutely no way, that you're going to not just balance the books, but make a profit. If you, even by cutting corners and saving a couple of million here and 10 million there and so forth, especially if you keep, if you keep sacking your manager and his staff and having to pay £15 million for which is basically a punishment for having taken the wrong decision to start with, or for taking the wrong decision full stop. But, whichever way you look at it, I'm not saying that what Ratcliffe says doesn't make sense. What I'm saying is that it's paradoxical to the point of being contradictory, and that I don't understand how It's possible to have, in French we say the butter and the money for the butter. It's like you want to have everything. You want to have the chicken and the egg. You want to cut costs, you want to invest on the transfer market, and at the same time, you want to be the most profitable club in the world.
Yes.
And by 2028, we're not talking, if he were talking about like a 15-year process, you would think, well, all right. And also you don't function in a vacuum. It would be possible perhaps to do that if Manchester United was living in a world of Southamptons. It's not. So there is this unfortunate thing that there is competition and the people around you are actually better than you are. And they're better than you are at almost everything. They're better at recruiting, they're better at getting results, they're better at managing their money. You have a lot of work and they have a much better stadium. But we're going to come to the stadium in a minute, I'm sure. I get the gist, I get the idea, thank you very much. But I don't understand how this is workable. And also I don't understand how you can live with those contradictions and how it can lead to a successful Manchester United, which suddenly, out of nowhere, from being a club that is actually, in any other circumstances, you would say it's in a relegation battle, okay? Or certainly it's trying not to be sucked into one, let's put it that way. And at the same time, if it were not Manchester United, you think this is insane. It's absolutely insane. But because it's Manchester United and we have this idea, and we've got to talk about that this club has got a God-given right to popularity. That's wrong. If you start thinking that, you're in serious, serious trouble. There is no club, especially in the evolving, I would say, psychological profile of the football fan who's going to actually spend their money on your club. That profile has changed a lot. And especially if you're talking about the globalization of the fan sphere, you'd better be very successful very quickly. Because there is one point at which people will say, you know what, I'm a bit fed up supporting a club that I don't have any kind of geographical family link with, because that's the case for Manchester United, when you claim 1 billion fans. And so there's one point where I become a bit bored. So you better win and win quick. And there's the other side of it, which is if I'm a sponsor or a commercial partner, there comes a time when I'm thinking, hold on a minute, what am I paying for here? Shouldn't I put this money somewhere else, or should I pay a bit less? You see what I mean, Duncan? I mean, it's... and I know that this is not necessary.
Absolutely. He talks about it being, you're right to point out, Ratcliffe talks about it being the biggest football club in the world, as though it's a God-given right. He also talks about this being a passion project, something he's doing because he's a supporter of the club, but then shifts into, I want it to be the most profitable club in the world. And the two things do not go together, as you've pointed out. If it's a passion project, the money he generates, assuming this cost-cutting program works, assuming this retooling program works, should go into players on the field in order to make them the most successful team possible. And then this idea that he has of cost-cutting first, I think it's kind of, you have to look at what they have done. It's not as though they've only been there 2 weeks. They've been there since December of 23. In the 2022-23 season, Manchester United finished third and qualified for the Champions League. In Ineos's first season, their first half season, they finished 8th, which is their worst ever Premier League finish. They're currently 14th in the Premier League, which is obscene by Manchester United standards. If you look at what that costs, what the decisions they've taken, the changes they've made, the decisions they've taken over the coach, which he admitted had been wrong, the decision over Dan Ashworth, which he said was an error, the decisions they made in the transfer market in the summer, which we've explored in this podcast before, was a critical summer of spending for them. What they've placed them in a position is where they're jeopardising perhaps 10 places of Premier League revenue for performance which is £30 million worth. They're jeopardising a place in the Champions League. You can look at the figures for the new Champions League. The worst performing English club in this season's Champions League, Manchester City, will take around £64 million of revenue from the competition before you add in match day and additional commercial revenue. If one of the English teams were to win the Champions League, and I think that's a lot less likely after PSG's incredible performance against Liverpool this week, that could have been worth €150 million before match day and commercial revenue. So that is more than the money Ratcliffe is saying he's taking off the bottom line. And some of that has been caused by the decisions they have taken since taking over the club. Then he goes into more detail and talks basically about this again, about you go for cost cutting first and football later. And he describes the structural changes that had to happen. We have to get it in a place where it's stable financially. That's sort of the first thing you have to do. Then we can move on to the difficult things like recruiting. We're dealing with the financial issues in club because the club has got financial issues and we need to address those now. Then we need to move on to the squad recruitment, data analysis and those type of things. What he's saying there, and these are his own words, is they're still busy trying to work out the financial operations of the club, and they haven't got the fundamental parts which everyone knows are critical to performance on the field, not even done, but not even really focused on yet.
This sounds crazy, doesn't it? Because you would imagine that this would be the very first thing that you're looking at. If for example, you look at, and I'm taking this example with a rather large pinch of salt and setting aside perhaps ethical considerations, but when the Abu Dhabi United Group, Sheikh Mansour, i.e. the Emirates, took over Manchester City, they didn't focus on making the operation a sound business. Quite the opposite. All the decisions they took were, let's go for it. And they were rewarded for that. And you might say they shouldn't have been rewarded for that. And in fact, they should be punished for what they did. But certainly the success was linked to that. And if you look at almost every single club which has been a success, you realize that the business model of a football club is totally different from the kind of businesses that Sir Jim Ratcliffe has been involved in before. And I know that's a bit of a truism and something people say, it's a bit easy to say that, but I genuinely don't think he understands anything about the football business. I genuinely think he doesn't understand anything, because he's framing everything in the way that has served him very well in the chemicals industry, where he has hardly built anything, but he's been a buyer and then seller. And certainly he has developed some business skills, and he certainly has a big killing instinct and so forth. But I think there's this weird thing that he seems to think that it's possible to transfer certain methodologies from one environment to the next without losing sight of without losing any of the efficiency of this methodology, which is valid in 2 points here. It's valid, for example, we can transfer what we did at Team Sky and Ineos when it was working, because it's not working anymore. In cycling, we can do that. And we can also transfer the business methods I've been using, in my companies, which have been very successful, and we can use that. No, you can't. You can't. And I know does that sound simplistic when I say that? But I do get the feeling that, there is a problem there, that I don't think that Sir Jim Ratcliffe ever thinks he can be wrong in anything, which is something that most billionaires have in common, by the way. And I don't know what to say anymore, because I'm thinking, he must know, Omar Barada must know, they must know all these things. And I'm looking at the decisions they're taking, I'm thinking, actually, do they? Could they be wrong in the very, very foundation of their approach? Be totally wrong to a point that they don't even realize there's a problem with it?
Well,
and I'm left with this idea that Sir Jim Ratcliffe, whatever his qualities may be, and, whatever his qualities may be, when it comes to football, I don't think that he, even though he's a football fan himself, I think the specificity of the football business, which is something that anybody who is involved in football at any level knows about, is something that passes him by. And I think that in a way, he thinks that the club is so big and he's so powerful and intelligent and all that he can somehow transform the paradigm by himself. That's honestly madness. Sorry, am I exaggerating here? Am I not understanding what his attitude is? Is there something? Am I missing something which is obvious and which I should be aware of?
I think you're correct to say that he's attempting to transfer the methodologies used in other areas of business to a football club. I think you're correct to mention Dave Brailsford and Omar Barada. And Barada is interesting because Barada has never been a chief executive of a football club before, but was allowed to appoint Ruben Amorim, was allowed to drive that process of appointing Ruben Amorim. Dave Brailsford was allowed to drive, I understand, the process of appointing Dan Ashworth. And when Ratcliffe was challenged on Brailsford, because people are criticising the fact that you put in charge of the organisation of a football club someone who's not really worked in football before. He has worked at Nice. He's talked about his understanding of football at Nice being like, was in black and white, whereas his understanding of cycling was in colour. But this is Ratcliffe defending Brailsford and saying he has some great skills at extracting the maximum performance out of those athletes.
Sorry, I have to have a little laugh to myself. I think many people who are following cycling closely might find this assertion very, very funny in a strange way.
We'll put that bit to the side and take Ratcliffe as maybe he intends to be understood. He said, that's only Brailsford's focus at Manchester United on elite performance. How do we improve elite performance? Because at the end of the day, football is elite athletes, but more of an emphasis on athlete data. Football today is a sprinting sport, and it wasn't a sprinting sport 20 years ago, which is why you get so many hamstring injuries and things like that today. Now, you probably haven't noticed this, but there was a response to that from former Manchester United assistant manager and friend of this podcast, Rui Faria, on his Instagram account yesterday. And he quoted Ratcliffe defending Brailsford, and he said, "It is impossible to be more inaccurate about performance than to regard a footballer as an athlete managed by data. Football constantly changes, but it always involves sprinting. Perhaps in the past, the sprinting had more brain and less legs. These days, supposed experts take more and more control of the process, demonstrating less and less understanding of context. Injuries are not the products of more sprinting, but of the quality and quantity of work. This reductionist vision of elite performance exposes how athlete data fails to optimize player performance. Instead, players fall injured like leaves in autumn." Now, if Ratcliffe was to check the data on this, go into Manchester United's data banks, I think he will find that when Rui Faria was in charge of Manchester United's footballers' fitness, he delivered their best player availability rates in the last decade. So I think this idea that Brailsford is going to solve all the problems because he succeeded in cycling is a fundamentally flawed one.
I just wanted to interject here because I'm going to use an example which might surprise people who follow what I do, but I'm going to use the example of Paris Saint-Germain. If you look at the performances, the two performances against Liverpool, which I think everybody would agree were absolutely outstanding performances, I'm sure that the data guys will tell you that they ran longer. There were more short sprints with intensity. Blah blah. You can go that, but I think that would be missing the complete point. They had the same ability before. What has changed is that they've been able to harness this into competition on the pitch. They had the same ability before. And it's not because the data are better that they won. It's because that they won that the data are better, if you see what I mean. Yep. The difference is that now they're playing for each other. The difference is now they're tracking back. The difference is that they're better organized tactically, so they understand where they can press and where they can't.
Yep.
They're better trained, so they're quicker in the transitions. And you can go on. And yes, the data will improve. But it's not because of data analysis that the performances have improved. It's because they've got a bloody good manager in place, and they've actually got some very good players and have done the necessary work in sporting terms to acquire a squad that is a squad and to create a team that now plays like a team. So I'm not saying that data are crap, because of course they're not crap. They're indicators. They're fantastic indicators. But if you base that, because again, this is driving me absolutely nuts, because the idea that, again, treating footballers as athletes, and in general terms, treating people who are involved in team sports like athletes and nothing but, is a complete misunderstanding of the dynamics of a team sport. It's obviously incredible. I mean, that's going back from Technicolor to black and white, in fact.
I agree with you completely. It's fundamental, but it also misses the point that everyone in football has data now. This idea that you'll solve your recruitment problems because you have good data analysis, good analytics. Everyone has that data. People analyze it in different ways, but what that data tells you is how a player is performing now and how they performed in the past. Doesn't tell you necessarily how they're going to perform in the future. And that's the real advantage in having a good recruitment team, is finding the people who can spot the players who will turn into top performing players and understand how you combine them together into a team that can do the kind of things that Paris Saint-Germain do. Let's go to Ruben Amorim, because we've mentioned him in passing, and Omar Barada. Ratcliffe's defence of Ruben Amorim, I think, is fascinating and feeds into all of this analysis we've already made. He has had 17 Premier League games in charge. He's won 5, he's drawn 4, he's lost 8. He's averaging 1.12 points per game, the worst of any Manchester United manager in the Premier League era. Ten Hag was at 1.22 points per game in his last 9 matches, i.e. this season. Ratcliffe's reasons for arguing that Ruben Amorim has done a remarkably good job are that he arrived mid-season, that he didn't have time to train players in his style of play, that he inherited a squad which he had no influence on, that English isn't his natural language, that he has no Premier League experience, that he's now managing the biggest club in the world, that Manchester United is a very tough place, and that he's a young guy. I don't know about you, Philippe, but they strike me as exactly the same reasons you could use to argue why Manchester United should not have appointed him in the first place.
Yes, I was thinking exactly the same thing. Because you shouldn't try and find excuses. You can still think that Ruben Amorim is one of the best young managers in European football.
Yep.
And there's absolutely no argument that he's actually that. Then afterwards it becomes, do you think he's suited to that particular club, particular project, blah, 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 blah. Is the context correct, blah, 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 all these sort of things. But the arguments are quite extraordinary, given that, I mean, the one about not speaking the language is one that absolutely stuns me, because I think we could find a few examples of managers who didn't really speak the language and still did okay, you know. I think we could find that. I think Claudio Ranieri would like a word. And the other reason, you know, he's too young. Well, if he's too young, don't take him then. It's like, okay, all right, fine. he arrived mid-season. Well, he arrived mid-season because you sacked the manager who just brought you 2 trophies. That's why he arrived mid-season. That was your decision. And also, he could have arrived before if you had actually thought for 5 minutes about it. Instead of extending the contract of the man, you would sack a few months later. I mean, which is, crazy. And it was you, my friend. It was your choice. It was not the previous regime or some other people influencing your choice. No, it was you. And yes, you can take every single argument and turn it on its head and say, you're trying to find excuses. I've got absolutely nothing for the fact that, an owner will defend their manager. That there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And actually, I quite like that for a change. It's quite refreshing. But don't use those arguments. Use those arguments. If you said, well, we made some wrong decisions, we didn't do the right recruitment, blah, blah, blah. We are responsible, he's not. But that's not what you hear, is it? And that's true that many of the problems that Ruben Amorim has got is that, yes, he didn't have a say in the recruitment, that's not his fault. You could not only turn the arguments on their head, but you can actually take them and use them against the current regime. It's like everything is an admission that the process could have been better. There's an admission of things which are not right, but there's no admission of responsibility here. And in fact, if you carry on, because we could spend hours, you can go through the fine granular detail of what he says, because he says a lot, which is fascinating. And again, we should be grateful for that, because I wish that, Josh Kroenke would do the same thing for Arsenal. I wish the people at Manchester City, actually, Mr. Mubarak, was as available, made himself as available as Ratcliffe has done. And we could carry on for a long time like this. But it doesn't quite make sense, whichever way you look at it, whichever prism you look at the situation through, it doesn't make sense. Every single thing that is said is actually not an answer. Everything that he says triggers more questions and more interrogations, and in fact more concerns.
To give an example, because he's been perceived as backing Ruben Amorim, but there was a little line in there in one of the interviews where he was asked about that, and he said his answer was, "I'm unequivocal about that. But bear in mind, I am backing the management team because at the end of the day, it's Omar Barada, it's Jason Wilcox, it's the management team that operate Manchester United." Yeah. If I'm reading that as Ruben Amorim, I'm not as comfortable as I might have been.
Well, especially if you add what Ratcliffe said about Ashworth as well, and that he said that when a tough decision has got to be made, even if it's unpopular or difficult to understand from the outside, you have to make it, and that's what makes you a good manager. Which is basically, I can do the exact opposite of what I was saying 5 minutes ago, if that's the right choice.
Yes.
And that's it. I agree with you on this one entirely. It's not exactly reassuring. Even though, it would be great to know, because there are many things. Ruben Amorim arrived with a certain style of play. He doesn't have the players to implement that style of play. He's obliged to go back to setups that really are not the ones he had in mind. Like, would Amorim, in his dreams, have a midfield with Casemiro and Christian Eriksen? I don't think so, somehow. But he's obliged to do so. And so there are plenty of reasons why Amorim, regardless of what you think of his capacity as a manager, is not succeeding. And in fact, Ratcliffe quotes some of them, but he stops there, and that's not where he should stop. That's where he should begin. He should ask himself, well, why is it that? Why is it that this and this and that? And then it would make sense.
Yes. And I think it was interesting to watch his face getting redder and redder in the interview with Gary Neville. Interesting in all of those interviews to hear him talking about it wasn't pleasant. He wasn't enjoying the way people were responding. At one point, when he was asked why he was doing this, he said, because Manchester United has been my boyhood club and I believe we can sort it out. If I didn't believe it, I wouldn't do it, would I? I'd sell it to the Qataris or something. I think all of these things are giving little hints about where Ratcliffe and where Manchester United are. We said we were going to mark his homework, Philippe. How many marks out of 10 for these interviews do you give him?
For effort, I would say 10 out of 10. For content, 2.5, something like that. And maybe I'm being harsh here, but I mean, we could carry on for forever, because also everything that is being said, it's not just what he says, it's the contradictions. Because sometimes, when somebody says something, that it's an opinion, it's a point of view, that's fine. But then when you have opinions and points of view which are self-excluding, contradictory, then you think, well, hold on a minute, it might be that you're right when you say this, but you've actually said the opposite as well. You're saying this and you're saying that, and those two things are contradictory and can't live together. And which is, and we've got, I think, to talk about the stadium as well. Because in all these plans, making profitability, and most profitable in the world, because it always has to be the most profitable in the world. It's the most this, most that in the world. Within 3 years, then going back to Champions League and challenging for the Champions League and for the title within 3 years as well. And you carry on, everything is within 3 years, whatever. And at the same time, within 5 years, you want to move in the biggest stadium in England, which is going to cost apparently £2 billion. And we all know that sums which are banded before building starts are genuinely to be taken with a pinch of salt, because no stadium has ever come under budget unless it was a stadium that afterwards crumbled into dust. So let's take £2 billion. Where are they going to come from? How are you going to become the most profitable, the most successful on the pitch, whilst having the biggest, most beautiful, whatever, stadium in the world for the cost of £2 billion minimum? I'm sorry, this is not going to happen within 5 years. And it is crazy, right? Unless somebody else pays for the stadium, which is, by the way, an interrogation which I'm starting to have, given the involvement of the City of Manchester in this, and given the fact that 10 Downing Street also made some comments about it, which I find very, very concerning indeed.
So Ratcliffe was clear in the interviews that they would pay for the stadium themselves, but they wanted the government regeneration project to go all the way around the stadium. In Old Trafford. And it's always interesting to see how clubs state these things. And the phrase Manchester United used was announcing its intention to pursue a new 100,000 seat stadium. That's 13,000 more seats than they would have put into Old Trafford if they'd rebuilt it, more corporate seating, radically increased match day revenue is the idea. Allow them to have concerts at the venue, etc., etc. Ratcliffe said it would be that financing is not an issue, but the detail of that we'd rather talk about in the future. Omar Barada the next day talked about it as being a very attractive investment opportunity. We're very confident we'll find a way to finance the stadium. There's been discussion of shareholders putting new money in, new shares for sale in the stock market. Bringing in investment partners, idea that the club could rent out the stadium, definitely looking at naming rights and sponsorship. But yes, you're talking about the most expensive stadium ever built in the UK by a margin. You're talking about an era where interest rates are significantly higher than the 2.75% that Tottenham managed to rebuild naming rights lane for.
Who will own? I can add a few things to that. I mean, also, I'm sorry, I'm going back to that. I'm not a Manchester United supporter myself. I'm an Arsenal supporter. And when it comes to local government or central government financing regeneration around the new stadium, I find that totally unacceptable. I really find this totally unacceptable. It was Arsenal FC who paid for the refurbishment of the tube stations around the stadium.
Yeah.
It was them who actually paid. They made money very cleverly by putting up, flats, a couple of blocks and so forth, selling them for good money and so forth. But there was absolutely no public money involved, and which is the right way to do. We're talking about private enterprise here. This is ridiculous. And the argument that it will create 90,000 jobs, something like that, that's utter bollocks. That is the argument that is used by every single developer I can think of, because what they do is that they conflate the permanent jobs with the jobs which are created during the building process and then disappear or go somewhere else. And of course, jobs. So it's a mantra that goes down well with local authorities and central government. But there is no way that taxpayers' money should go into this project. I don't know how you feel. I'm sorry.
No, you're absolutely right to highlight this jobs figure. This comes from a consultancy called Oxford Economics, who Manchester United hired to come up with these numbers. The claim is an additional £7.3 billion per year to the UK economy. And at the possible creation, note possible creation is the phrase used, of 92,000 new jobs, more than 17,000 new homes, as well as driving an additional 1.8 million visits annually. Now, 92,000 new jobs, let's put that in the context of employment in Manchester. According to the Office for National Statistics, overall, and I'm quoting here, there were around 289,000 people aged 16 and over in Manchester who were employed in the year ending December 2023. So they're talking about a third more jobs on the entire working population of Manchester. So
I think these people should be in charge of the economy, right?
I think they were until very recently.
Oh, yes, that's true. Sorry, my bad.
But with Ratcliffe, who cites Oxford Economics, he said their number is 7 billion per annum of value added to Manchester North economy because the new stadium would become like the Eiffel Tower. It would be such I'm not quoting anymore, be such a stunning project that people would come from around the world to look at the stadium. Now you've seen we've all seen the designs, I guess, now, if you haven't.
The circus tent, yes. Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, absolutely spectacular, according to Gary Neville. World's greatest football stadium, according to Jim Ratcliffe. As one person commented on Twitter when they saw the pictures, looks like an circus, and with all the clowns in it, that's about right. What's your view on the aesthetics of...
Oh, it's disgusting. No, it's absolutely disgusting. I'm not saying that the concept of the umbrella, for example, well, why not? But the actual stadium and those three poles...
200 meters high and visible from 40 kilometers, according to the architect, Norman Foster.
Yes, I have to say I found the stadium pretty much, and I saw, and it's true that the time that, maybe they've taken the parallel with the Tour Eiffel, because when the Eiffel Tower was built in 1877, if I'm not mistaken, people were looking at it as an abomination, and Guy de Maupassant, the French novelist and short story writer, said it should be pulled down, and obviously it wasn't pulled down and became rather successful. But in terms of aesthetics, or it really looks, when I first saw the mock-up, I thought this looked exactly the kind of thing that Mohammed bin Salman would love.
Yes. So
it's huge. It's too big, it's crazy, it's the biggest in the world. It's all this thing, it's all about hyperbole. Everything is about hyperbole. When I saw, if you want to take, when I saw the plans of the new Tottenham Stadium, I was actually wowed by it. And I thought, this is incredible. That's a beautiful stadium. Whenever you think about Tottenham and Daniel Levy or anything, it's a beautiful stadium. You look at this thing, first of all, it doesn't feel like a stadium at all. It feels like one gigantic shopping mall with a stadium inside, which is maybe what they're trying to create. So aesthetically, I think it has no merits whatsoever. I can't think of any. I think it's actually an eyesore. I think it's overbearing. I think it really looks like a circus tent. That's not really apt, perhaps. And it's not me lacking imagination or whatever. I was looking forward, for example, to Chelsea Football Club moving in the Battersea Power Station. I thought this was a brilliant idea. So I'm all for imagination and daring, but this is not, it's actually quite boring and banal. It's a bit like people who think that having a gold toilet makes your bathroom somehow more beautiful. It's that kind of thing. It's not really that elegant. Yes, and it reminds me of those designs that are sold to Mohammed bin Salman for NEOM and for the 2034 World Cup.
It also, Philippe, and it's difficult to tell from the mock-ups, it looks like a big bowl. It looks like a lot of the supporters are going to be a very long way from the action, which is absolute what you don't want to build a top-class football stadium like. And maybe this isn't a coincidence, because who's been hired to build the stadium? It's the same Norman Foster who co-designed a Wembley stadium that is far from world-class in terms of atmosphere, far from world-class in terms of sightlines. Most of the seats you feel a long way from the action, and has a retractable roof that doesn't even cover the pitch for all the seats. It's yes, Foster has a reputation as being this great architect, but if you were to assess him on his body of work when it comes to building football stadiums, I don't think I would hire him. And the mock-ups would suggest that I would be right not to hire him.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing you can say that the Wembley Arch has become something of a symbol.
Yes,
but
for sure.
What's under the Wembley Arch is not exactly great. My goodness, I don't look forward to go there, but there you go. But the thing, I mean, maybe more importantly than the aesthetics is the economics of it, because 2 billion minimum, I stress minimum, is an awful lot of money, which the club hasn't got. So my question would be, who will own the stadium? This is not a meaningless question, because if it's the club itself, well, good luck, guys, because you're going to have to borrow that money, right? I mean, you could have a capital increase, but if you were financing that through capital increase only, that it would mean either that Ratcliffe would have to find money in his pockets so that his own shareholding is not diluted, because 2 billion, we're starting to look at a sizable part of the shareholding. And who is going to bear the responsibility for reimbursing the loans, which no doubt will have to be taken? Will it be the club, or will it be a different company? You see, there are things like that. I like to know those kind of details, because they are not details. And because I cannot see how it's possible, again, for a club to embark on what is basically a program of austerity within, and at the same time spending a huge amount of money over the building of a new stadium that, in the best case scenario, will be ready in 5 years' time. In the best case scenario, in a pretty complicated context, politically and geopolitically speaking as well, but maybe that should even be a concern.
Very true.
And also with the idea, at the same time, we will need to keep the club at a sporting level that will guarantee that when the stadium opens, we'll have 100,000 bums on seats and not just 65 or 70,000.
And that it's important to mention that not that long ago, they got knocked out of the FA Cup by Fulham in a match where they were only able to sell 67,600 tickets.
Yeah. And there's also, of course, the attendant question of the cost of the tickets. Will the fans be asked to stump up money? We all know what happened with the £66 a head tickets that were introduced by Ratcliffe and his regime, and how well that went down with the fans. There is a limit. Manchester is not the wealthiest city. It's fast growing, but it's not the wealthiest city in Britain. And the fan basis of stadium-going fans is still very much Mancunian working class. It's still very much that. There are tourists, of course, but the tourists are genuine fans, by the way. But what are you expecting? Do you think that people are going to travel the world over to look at a team that is struggling in mid-table and is being knocked out of the of the League Cup in the quarterfinals or something like that. I mean, and he's playing in the Europa Conference League or the Europa League. You think that? You think people are going to cross the world to pay like 150 quid for a ticket? Not too sure about that. I mean, you'll find some. Will you find 100,000? I'm not too sure.
They'll come to see the Eiffel Tower of Manchester, Philippe.
Yes, that's right. But then in which case they'll do what most people do when they go and see the Eiffel Tower in Paris. They go to the Champ de Mars, they have a good look at it, they take their pictures in front of it, and then they move away, and they don't pay the money to go to the top of it. That's the problem with attractions of that kind. You don't need to get inside. It's like the Taj Mahal. Nobody posts pictures of the inside of the Taj Mahal. Everybody posts the same picture of themselves posing in front of the Taj Mahal. Maybe it will be the name of that, or Old Trafford, I don't know. It would be some kind of Taj Mahal, a kind of memorial to the hubris and the ambitions of the Manchester United regime. I'm joking. I'm half joking because there are some very, very important questions here that are yet to be resolved. And again, it's the paradox of it. How can you embark on a program of austerity? I'll come back to that. Embark on a program of austerity, have huge sporting ambitions, and at the same time, you're building a stadium which is going to cost £2 billion. Don't forget that we've also got people called the Glazers are still the majority shareholders. You know, people tend to forget that. Do you think the Glazers, or maybe they will sell the whole lot, the whole caboodle? Because if there's one thing that is sure, is that the Glazers won't want to lose any of their money on anything like this, or anything having to do with Manchester United.
As the Ineos Compass says in Ratcliffe London offices, don't do dumb shit.
Yeah.
Let's move on to another favourite of yours, Philippe, the world governing body, and Gianni Infantino, who has been in the United States to present his brand new Club World Trophy to Donald Trump. Trump describes Gianni as the king of soccer, I guess, in a certain way. Mm-hmm. What were your thoughts on their meeting, Philippe?
Well, my thoughts could not possibly be expressed in the kind of language that would be suitable for as elegant a podcast as this, but I think people can guess that. No, I think we have... I recently did a piece for Yosima with my friend Samindra Kunti, in which basically we tried to put out there the extraordinary relationship that Gianni Infantino has with dictators and strongmen and authoritarian figures all across the planet. And to the exception, basically the people he spends the most time with are the worst people in the world. And, you know, he's met them all. It's very difficult where to start because what has become of Gianni Infantino is that he's actually one of them now. Is FIFA very much functions like the regimes of these people. As in, you can see at the moment what Trump is doing is basically bleeding, is basically destroying the constitution because he couldn't care less. It's just a bit like FIFA ignores its own statutes when it suits them. It is dismantling the judiciary and removing its independence, which is what FIFA has already done by dismantling the independent ethics commission and compliance committees and so forth. And Trump is putting people he can trust in positions of power, even if those people are totally unsuitable for the jobs or are just complete maniacs. There are fewer maniacs in Zurich than in the White House. I have to give that to Gianni. But the people who are in place are very much his people. Trump obviously overuses the presidential powers, which is exactly the same thing for FIFA, because normally within FIFA, the actual executive powers should rest with the Secretary General. And we know that he had Fatma Samora as a Secretary General who was basically there to tick a few boxes. And then he's put in place Matjav Grafström, who is a very capable person, but who is basically his master's voice and does what he's being told to do. And he's a good executant. That's all there is to it. And you could carry on. The parallels are extraordinary. The way that people who threaten his authority throughout the world become pariahs, the way people who flatter him become people who have... You just have to look at the influence he exerts on African football these days, and what happened at the Congress where Patrice Motsepe was given a new mandate without opposition again. Just a couple of days ago, and you look at the people who were barred from entering the FIFA Council and the people who were given the red carpet treatment. All the people who were given the red carpet treatment are people who are very close to the Infantino regime just by coincidence. And you could carry on like that. I mean, it's authoritarianism, and football is basically run like one of those regimes. Fortunately for us, it doesn't have as awful consequences as those regimes would have for their own citizens or for the countries that they invade or try to make submit to their will. It's only football. But the way it goes, and the way he's been elected, for example, basically there are no elections anymore at FIFA because there's a Congress and there's only one candidate and he's acclaimed. And that's the way. So I guess there is a kind of a similarity in the way that the regimes work. The World Football Government very much works like an authoritarian regime, with at the helm Gianni Infantino, who, by the way, of course, had the statutes changed so that he could run for another term. Just like there are Republicans who are thinking, how can we change the constitution so that Trump can have a third term? The parallels are there for everybody. And what he's doing is truly shocking. I mean, the way he's kowtowing to Donald Trump, I mean, it's excruciating. I think the expression I used when I wrote this piece with Sam was that we all have to dine with the devil at some point, and what matters is the length of the spoon. And in the case of Gianni, his nose is in the bowl. and that's really what is cringy, and worse than that, because he's speaking for us all. He's supposedly the man who represents world football, and therefore all of us. And then you see him using the Make America Great Again slogan at Trump's inauguration. And you think, this is shocking, mate. You know, do you realize what you're doing here? And you have to ask yourself, Duncan, what this 2026 World Cup is going to be like. Because I don't think it's going to be the triumph if things carry on. I mean, if we still have a planet, I don't think it's going to be quite the triumph that Gianni and Trump were saying it was going to be, by actually brandishing extraordinary figures, again, billions and billions of dollars of this, probably over 90,000 jobs created. And everybody's lapping that up. But hold on a minute, it's a World Cup which is supposed to be held in two other countries as well, Mexico and Canada, which won't be the 51st state by then. There's no chance of that happening. So in two countries which are in conflict with the USA in commercial terms. It's insane.
You talked about Gianni Infantino acquiring territories. We have Trump in the middle of this talking about acquiring Canada, talking about Canada as the 51st state. The White House press secretary and Homeland Security secretary regularly referring to it as the 51st state. It's got to the point where administration officials are briefing that Trump should not accept Canada as a state, but that it should be a territory because Canadians are too liberal to be trusted with their votes. So they should be acquired as a territory, but not allowed to vote in American elections if there are American elections going forward. But as you point out, they're combining with two nations to host this biggest World Cup ever, which is an immense logistical challenge. 104 matches, up to 6 matches a day this time, across the whole continent. And they're in the middle of a trade war and a territorial war. Trump was asked about that and he said, I think it's going to make it more exciting. Tension's a good thing.
Yeah. And when he said that, you could see Gianni nodding and even smiling in the background, thinking, oh yeah, that's good for football, isn't it? By the way, because it might have escaped our listeners, I want to convey some good news because about Greenland. I don't know if you saw that there were elections in Greenland,
Yes.
and the Trumpsters actually didn't even win a single seat in Greenland's parliament. So small mercies. And also there is the problem of visas, because in this big World Cup, there are going to be Central American countries, there are going to be African countries, there are going to be Asian countries, which, the US immigration authorities, those marvelously friendly people, will not want anywhere in the country, right? So what's going to happen? Because usually FIFA negotiates with the organizers of the World Cups special regimes, immigration regimes for people who bought tickets for the World Cup. I don't think this is going to happen for the 2026 World Cup. And I'm very intrigued to see what kind of arrangement will be put in place if, says, Honduras qualifies.
Yeah, the history of World Cups has been host nations having things imposed upon them by FIFA and complaining about that. South Africa, Japan, Korea. It's difficult to see Gianni Infantino imposing anything on Donald Trump. Let's talk about the Club World Cup, which obviously happens this summer. Infantino in that press conference described it as the new competition that we, signalling to Trump, created together. So football fans, please beware that Donald Trump was, according to the president of the world governing body responsible for creating the World Cup. FIFA have said they're budgeting for $2 billion of revenue. They actually announced last week that their expected revenues for the next 4 years had gone up by $2 billion to $13 billion in total. And they have stated that all revenue generated by the tournament will be distributed to the participating clubs and via club solidarity across the world, as FIFA will not keep a single dollar. FIFA's reserves, which are there for global football development, will remain untouched. How trustworthy is that statement, that all revenue generated from the tournament will be distributed to the participating clubs? Are you confident that will be achieved by FIFA?
Maybe, and the reason why I say that is that one of the only ways that you could get the clubs, especially the big clubs, big European clubs, you could get them to take part in this competition, which is, just stuck at the back of a very, very long season in Europe, is by paying them. You will remember what Carlo Ancelotti said the first time, when he said we're not going to that, crappy competition. Before being told by Real Madrid, actually, Carlo, we might be, but it depends on the money. It's basically.
Yeah.
So this is the way you're going to get, because I would imagine that for this competition, it's not just that Real Madrid, who might or might not be the new European champions, with players who are only thinking about one thing, which is to have some holidays at long last, will be there. And not only will they be there, but they will be forced to have Mbappe, Vinicius, Rodrigo, Bellingham on the pitch, because you don't want a team of Lucas Vázquez, right? Good as he is, on the pitch for the Club World Cup, which is apparently the greatest competition ever invented in the universe. So the only way you're going to convince those people to do that is by putting an awful lot of money on the table. But this being said, that's an awful lot of money. That's an awful lot of money. And I'm also thinking, hold on a minute, because you're going to have to be very careful about the way you distribute this. I'm thinking about the case of Inter Miami. Inter Miami were shooed in the competition against all FIFA statutes.
Handpicked by Gianni.
They were handpicked by Gianni for the sole reason that he has a close relationship, shall we say, with Inter Miami, and he wanted Leo Messi to be involved, and he wanted David Beckham to be involved, and all this kind of crap. The other clubs who should have been invited, I don't think they would particularly like it if suddenly Inter Miami saw, I don't know, $50 million fall in their account for taking part in a competition they hadn't qualified for. I think that might be a bit problematic. I do think so. So, of course, like you, I take it with a pinch of salt, because the idea that FIFA will give all the money away is something that, FIFA usually doesn't do that. Well, I'm sure he means that after all FIFA's expenses have been paid for and so forth, and, so there might not be $1 billion in the end. And this $1 billion, by the way, corresponds exactly to the amount of money that the Saudis have put in the zone when they were desperately trying to find a broadcaster for this competition that nobody's interested in.
Absolutely. And DAZN have promised to broadcast free to view as well.
Yeah.
$1 billion to FIFA to broadcast for free.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing stinks, but it's just the way things are with FIFA right now. I'm like you, I find the whole premise quite extraordinary. And you wonder actually what the ultimate objective of this is, because I think the idea of the Club World Cup to start with was there was a political dimension to it, which is basically we want to create a competition that is going to knock the UEFA Champions League off its perch as the most important club competition on the planet, because it's UEFA and it should be FIFA which is in charge of everything, because they want everything. That was one thing. It was also a way it was part of the Saudi strategic plan to become like number one actors in the football world and the sports world at large, yeah. But things have changed since the idea was first mooted, and the problem is that nobody wants it. It's still the extraordinary thing is that nobody wants it. The fans don't want it. The players don't want it. The clubs might want it if there's a lot of money, but still a bit of a problem. And the broadcasters don't want it. And the sponsors, they won't put any money into it until they know who is going to broadcast the bloody thing. Because you're not going to invest loads of money in a competition that's going to be shown and at some very strange times as well on the main markets. I don't know if you looked at that. I looked at it and thought, whoa, that doesn't make sense. Everything about it is ridiculous. The trophy itself is ridiculous with this little key, with this kind of portal to hell. It's quite extraordinary, and Trump showing the key and everything. I mean, the whole scene, it's so cringe. It's incredible. Do they realize how ridiculous they look? And the answer is no, they don't. They think they're brilliant. They think they're fantastic. Gianni genuinely thinks he's the best thing that's ever happened to football. These people are mad. They're mad.
To underline that, Trump, after he'd had a look at the trophy, asked Infantino who he thought were favourites to win the Club World Cup, and Infantino came up with Real Madrid, yeah, easy shout, and Manchester City. In the same week as Pep Guardiola described the Club World Cup as an opportunity for him to play golf in the United States and to let his players free.
One of the rare occasions on which Pep and I are exactly on the same hymn sheet. Man.
But your point on the money going to the clubs, I think, is also underlined by an interview that Paris Saint-Germain and European Club Association President Nasser Al-Khelaifi gave last week in Germany when he was asked about the demands that this tournament was placing on the players. You said the players don't want to be there. And he said, I don't agree with the criticism on workload. The Club World Cup only takes place every 4 years with 32 clubs. It's not a new competition, but replaces the old Club World Cup, which is a fundamentally different tournament, which took place in a week. This tournament is not the cause of workload issues. Let's look at the NBA. Games are played every 2 days. And he went on to discuss that they had to sort out the revenue sharing agreement with FIFA to ensure that the biggest European clubs got their fair share, i.e. the biggest chunk of the revenues sent to them, which tells you where the whole thing comes from, as you've explained to us. Philippe, let's finish up with the hero and villain section. My villain was going to be Erling Haaland for his social media taunt about people being deep down too lazy not to have a sauna during the day, because we all obviously have saunas in our house to keep ourselves fit for Premier League football. But last night's Champions League match managed to take over even from Erling Haaland. The VAR intervention, which ruled out Julian Alvarez's penalty shootout conversion for an alleged double touch of the football, which the referee certainly did not see and was not obvious in most of the video replays. That's just another example of how technologies creep into football, damages the sport. And I think if we're going to use video to microanalyze penalty kicks, then we're going to have another rewrite of the laws so that an accidental double touch in a shootout results in a retake, not a miss, because you have a goalkeeper leaving his line early to save a penalty, results in a retake. And I don't see any footballers, no matter how skilled they are, intentionally double touching a penalty kick in the shootout to try and gain an advantage.
Yeah, I'm with you with that. And I'm left with a hero, which is always very difficult because there are very few heroes to talk about. But I will be on the pitch, actually. And hero is a strong word because it's not someone who did something that heroic in itself, but because that young player is symbolic of the complete transformation of a team, and it's not a club I like, but at all. But I think the same way we can make the difference between a country and a regime, which is very important. Mm-hmm. So you can say that Mohammed bin Salman is a bloodthirsty dictator, and at the same time, I have no problem with Saudi Arabia as a country and as a people. That's absolutely fine, and actually that should be the way we behave. The same way, I was gobsmacked by Paris Saint-Germain over the two legs, and I thought that the best symbol of how good they've become and their attitude, and again, it's the team I'm talking about, it's not the club, was Nuno Mendes. So I'll take a footballer as being an absolutely beautiful example of a player who is known for his attacking capacities, his speed, and so forth, who accepted to change the way he actually plays normally and to snuff out the threat of one of the greatest players the world has ever seen, i.e. Mohamed Salah. And the way he did it, for me, was symbolic of the whole attitude of that team. So if that's okay to take him, because to be honest, there aren't many heroes in football, and that's pushing the world hero a little bit far. But I do like players who remind us that football is first and foremost a team sport. And so for that, Nuno Mendes, thank you very much.
Two of the best football matches I've seen for a very long time. So appropriate that you pick a hero from one of those games. Philippe, thank you for your time and your wisdom. I mentioned musician at the start. I believe you have a new album coming out.
Yeah, the new single is out and the new album is out on the 2nd of May on Tapete Records in Germany and elsewhere, as a matter of fact. And I will be playing a rare gig, a full gig in London on the 12th of July. So, if you're around, you're very welcome to attend, guys. And especially you, Duncan.
Thank you, Philippe. For those who don't know, Philippe sings under the name Louis Philippe. It's Louis Philippe and the Night Mail is the band. Yep. I've been listening to his last album, Thunderclouds, recently, and I can highly recommend it to those who've enjoyed this podcast. Look out for the new one. Thank you, Philippe. That was great.
Thank you very much, Duncan.
You've been listening to the Transfers podcast, powered by FootballTransfers.com. If you liked what you heard, spread the word. Please follow, share, and rate us. You can also message us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at Transfers Podcast. Our Twitter and Blue Sky address is at TransfersCast. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Duncan Castles. Philippe is on Blue Sky at Philippe Auclair. Our production is by Mark Caulfield and our music by Mark Caulfield and David L. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening.
He did the transfer window. Ian McGarry, who left us, it was a blow for a couple of years. Duncan was low. Now he's back with a new show. It's called The Transfers. It's where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. go. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go.